Okay, let's go ahead and get started talking about some of our basic percent problems. And there's going to be two different ways of using percents to solve some of our basic questions. One way is with what we call our percent equation. And our percent equation is basically this. It is that a percent times a base is equal to an amount. And when we're solving things, we're just going to translate and solve. The other way that we're going to do this is not with the percent equation, but with what we call the percent proportion. And that percent proportion is the same sort of idea. It's just remember that a percent is always a parts of 100, so we'll have that percent, whatever that number is, over 100 is going to be equal to the amount divided by our base. So these are our two main methods of solving. Using our percent equation, we're using that percent proportion. Let's go ahead and show you how to go about, well, first of all, let's start with our percent equation. And before we do, let's talk a little bit about how to translate. We're going to have a couple things that we're going to say. If we're going to say, well, there's keywords that we're going to see. Is going to be equivalent to our equal sign. Of, in these circumstances, it's not in every circumstance, but in these circumstances, is going to be multiplication. Percent, of course, is our percent. So our percent we need to convert to a decimal. Our decimal number to represent a percent. Whatever number follows of, if something follows the word of, so a word that follows the word of, that right there is going to be our base. Whatever left over is going to be our amount. Now we also have things like what number. What number, where this could either be our base or our percent. What percent, when we find it, we're going to solve it, it's going to be a decimal, and we'll need to convert back to a percent. So what number or what percent? We're going to use a variable. Let's say that what number is 15% of 63? So here's our first example. And I usually like to start with the is, just because it tells us it tells us what sort of equation we've got. Is always is going to be equals. This of is going to be our multiplication. And like I say, we're going to have our percent, and whatever follows the word of tends to be our base. So we've got percent is going to, so this tells us that this piece right here is going to be our amount. This is our percent, and this number here is going to be our base. Well, we have a number for that. This 63 is just 63. That 15%, I'm going to write that as a decimal, so 0.15. And since we're looking for an amount, rather than use just any old variable, I'm going to call that A. Makes it a little easier. Hopefully, this looks like an equation we know how to solve. Everything, I've already isolated the variable. All I need to do is multiply. So let's go ahead and do it. What happens when I multiply 0.15 times 63? Now I've got 9.45, and that's going to be our answer. 9.45. What number is 15% of 63? 9.45 is. Okay, let's do it again. Let's say we've got what percent of 42 is 28? Let's find out. So what percent, this tells us that we're looking for a percent right here. The word following of, that's our base. And that last piece, that last value is going to end up being our amount. So, and of course, of is going to be multiply, is going to be our equal sign. Well, I don't know what percent I've got here, but I can just multiply, I can just use P for a variable. P times 42 is going to be equal to this 28. All we've done is just translate this nearly word for word. Well, solving this, I've got a multiplication here, and I need to isolate this variable, so I'm going to take both sides, and I'm going to divide by 42. There's a lot of shortcuts that people will come up with, but the difficulty with making shortcuts is you've got three different options: multiply, divide, and when you divide, what order do you divide in? If you're just guessing, you'll get the wrong answer more often than you'll get the right one. Which is why I want you guys to do this kind of translation. So, 28 divided by 42, let's see what happens. 28 divided by 42. Well, it looks like we've got 66.6 bar. So this is going to be, I'll change this to approximately 66.7%. And there we go. Let's take a look at, let's do another one. Let's say we've got something like, okay, 25 is 40% of what number? Well, again, it's easy to spot where our percent is. This is our percent. Whatever word follows of is our base. Looks like of is multiply, is our equal. This means that this 25 is going to be our amount. Okay. Let's go ahead and do this. I'll have 25 is 45%. We want to convert that to a decimal. Times whatever our base is. And notice that I'm trying to use fairly meaningful variables. That way it's easier to tell what I'm solving for. Okay, let's go ahead and solve. Here I need to isolate this b. So in order to do that, I need to divide. On this side, I just need to divide by this 0.45. What I do to one side, I do the same thing to the other, 0.45. So, looking at that, I would just end up saying 25 divided by 0.45. Okay. This happens to be at 55.5 bar. So is our base. So I'm going to go ahead and just think of that as a 55.6 as our base. And that's close enough for us. Here I'm actually saying it is okay to round. But I will also say, look at your instructions. Your instructions are going to give you a little bit more information as to what's appropriate or not. Where is a good place to round? So read your instructions. All right, let's talk about a percent proportion. And again, remember that percent proportion, we've got that percent, so this is the percent proportion. We have that percent over 100 is equal to that amount divided by the base. So our thing that we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to basically fill in the blanks. These turn into plug and play questions. So let's say we've got something like how would I say, what number is 25% of 44? Well, this is where that practice that we had before, where we said, oh, here's our percent. This tells us that what this is a percent of. This number here is going to be our base, which tells us that we're looking for an amount. So what we're going to do is we're just going to plug in these numbers into this sort of equation. We've got something over 100 is going to be equal to our amount over our base. Well, we happen to know that our percent is 25. We know that our base is 44. What we don't know is our amount. So we're looking for an amount. Well, at this point we can go ahead and, now that we've got this set up, we're going to cross multiply and divide. So we're going to have 25 times 44 is going to be equal to 100 times A. 25 times 44 is going to be 1100 is equal to this 100A. Now we're going to divide. Let's divide both sides by 100. I'll end up with my amount here is equal to, looks like 11. Alrighty, hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.